The rain had been falling since midnight. What would you do if the stranger you saved turned out to be the most dangerous man alive? What if his enemies already knew your name? Nia James was on her third pass of the same counter. The cafe long empty, the register locked, her feet aching in the way they always did after a double. Cafe Soleil looked better at night. The low amber lights hiding the chip tile, the cracked stool leg she kept meaning to fix, the nursing school application still half finished on her phone. She completed tomorrow. She always said tomorrow. She heard it at 2:14 a.m. Not a knock. A body, hitting the alley door hard. She stood still for 3 full seconds, mop handle in her hand. Then she opened it anyway. He was on his knees in the rain, jaw clamped shut, one hand flat against the wet brick, holding himself up by will alone. His shirt was black and darker in one place than everywhere else, and it wasn't from the rain. He looked up at her slowly. His eyes were dark and completely still, the eyes of a man who had already decided he would not let her see how bad it was. He didn't ask for help. He didn't speak. He just held her gaze and waited, like he already knew what she would choose. Something in that wrecked her completely. She grabbed his arm and dragged him inside, kicked the door shut, pressed a dish towel to his side, and held it there with both hands while the rain hammered the roof and the city outside carried on like nothing had happened. When she reached for her phone, he said it, low, flat, final.
Don't call anyone.
3 words. English, accented, no room for argument. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she put the phone down and opened the first aid kit she'd kept under the register for 2 years and never touched. She worked in silence. No training, just instinct. Hands steady in the way they got when everything in her went quiet, and her body simply decided to handle it. He watched her face the entire time. Not her hands. Her face. Like she was the more complicated thing in the room to figure out. She made him coffee. Black. He drank it without a word. She wrapped her spare coat around his shoulders, and he let her, which told her more than anything he'd said. By 4 a.m. he was gone. She hadn't heard him leave. On the counter where he'd sat, a single black card. No name. No number. Just a red dragon pressed into wax. Its tiny eye catching the light, like it was watching her back. She slipped it into her apron pocket, turned off the lights, went home. She was asleep by 5. At 6, the blue and red bled through her curtains. For cruisers, 2 black Federal sedans she didn't recognize, and a voice below, hard official, cutting straight through the rain still falling outside. We know someone was in here last night. Open up. She lay still in the dark, coat still damp on the chair beside her, the dragon card on the nightstand, her fingerprints on the coffee cup she'd washed, his fingerprints on the one she hadn't. He came back the next morning. Nia was still turning the key in the front lock when she saw him, already seated at the corner table, coat dry this time, hands wrapped around nothing, waiting with the patience of a man who had learned to wait in places far less comfortable than this. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she went and made him coffee without being asked. Black. No sugar. He nodded once. He left $40 for a $3 cup and was gone before the first real customer arrived. He came back the morning after that, and the one after that, always before opening, always the same corner, always gone by 7. The cash he left was never the right amount, always too much, folded without ceremony under the cup's edge like he'd never learned the appropriate size of a gesture and didn't particularly care to. Nia told herself she should say something, ask him to leave, ask him anything. She didn't. There was something about the way he occupied a room, not loudly, not with any performance of authority, but with a kind of gravity that rearranged everything around him without trying. She felt it every morning like a change in pressure, like the moment before weather. She noticed the tattoo on day 4. A serpent, coiling up the left side of his neck. Ink so deep it looked carved rather than drawn. Its body wound toward his jaw in slow, deliberate curves, and at the top, where its head rested just below his ear, a single red eye. The only color on him that wasn't black or shadow. She caught herself looking at it longer than she should have, and looked away. On day 7, she set his coffee down and said, without planning to, "What's your name?" He looked up at her, quiet, unhurried, like the question didn't surprise him, but the fact that she'd waited this long might have. Jean. Just that. No last name offered. No expression that invited her to ask for one. That night she typed it into her phone. Jean. Korea. Chicago. She scrolled through thousands of results, actors, athletes, a city in China, a software company in Seoul. Nothing that looked like him. Nothing that felt like him. She put her phone down and stared at the ceiling and told herself it wasn't her business, which was the kind of thing you only had to tell yourself when it already was. The next morning, she was looking up Korean phrases, 안녕하세요, 감사합니다, mouthing them quietly behind the counter, not entirely sure why. Jean watched her from his corner table. She didn't notice until she looked up and found him already looking, and something shifted in his face. Not a smile, nothing that generous, but a softening around the eyes, there and gone in under a second, like a door opened and then thought better of it. She almost smiled back. Then the door opened. A man she had never seen walked in, tailored jacket, unhurried steps, eyes that registered her and immediately dismissed her. He crossed the cafe without looking at the menu and sat down across from Jean like he owned the chair, like he owned the room. He slid a photograph across the table. Jean didn't touch it. His entire body went still, not tense, not alarmed, something worse than both. The absolute stillness of a man who already knew what the photograph was and had been waiting for it to arrive. Then he looked up, directly at Nia. Across the cafe, through the steam and the morning light, his dark eyes found hers with a precision that felt like a hand on her shoulder. His expression said one thing only: leave the room. Now, she told herself it was just coffee. That was the lie she used for the first few days, that he was just a customer, that the corner table was just a corner table, that the fact she started making his cup before he knocked on the glass each morning was simply efficiency. Good service. Nothing more. But Jean had started staying longer, not talking much. He was never a man who filled silence just to fill it, but present in a way that changed the texture of the room. He read at the corner table, thick paperbacks with cracked spines, titles she couldn't pronounce. When she asked him once what he was reading, he turned the cover toward her. Dostoevsky. In Russian. She raised an eyebrow and he said, without inflection, that English translations lost something in the weight of the sentences. She asked how many languages he spoke. He considered the question longer than it should have required. 4, he said, depending on what you count as speaking. On day 13, she came in to find the back door latch, broken for 6 months, propped shut with a paint can, repaired clean. No note, no mention of it. She looked at him across the cafe, and he looked back at his book, and she felt something shift low in her chest that she chose not to examine. He learned she took her coffee with 1 sugar and a half pour of oat milk. He never said anything about it. He just made sure the oat milk was restocked when it ran out. Cash left on the counter beside an empty carton. She pretended not to notice. It was easier that way. The night he walked her to her car, it was raining again. Chicago had decided October meant something personal this year. He held the umbrella entirely over her side, his shoulder dark and wet before she realized what he was doing. She reached up to correct it, and his hand moved slightly, keeping the angle. She let it go, standing beside her car in the rain. Neither of them spoke for a moment. She almost forgot about the black card. She almost forgot about the federal sedans. Almost. But the strange cars had been parked on the opposite curb for 3 days now. Different plates, same stillness. And the woman in the tailored suit had appeared twice. Once photographing the cafe front, once just watching. Phone raised, unhurried and unashamed. Jean had seen her too. Nia could tell by the way his jaw worked when he clocked the street each morning, arriving later, leaving earlier, eyes moving in slow professional arcs across every window. One evening, she was restocking behind the counter and looked up to find him watching her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not cold, not careful. Something that looked almost like regret ahead of schedule. She glanced at the scar where the serpent tattoo ended near his jaw. He caught her looking. "You should know this about me," he said quietly, setting his cup down. "Everyone around me gets hurt eventually." She opened her mouth, closed it. Before she could find the words, the window exploded white with headlights, 2 SUVs mounting the curb hard, doors already swinging open, men pouring out in tactical black that was not a uniform she recognized, moving with the kind of coordination that didn't come from a badge. Jean was on his feet before the first door opened. His hand closed around her wrist, firm, certain, no hesitation, and they were moving through the kitchen before she'd processed the sound of boots hitting pavement outside. He didn't check which way to go. He didn't slow down to look. He went straight for the back exit, the one that sat behind the dry storage shelf, the one she'd never shown him, the one she'd half forgotten was there herself. He knew exactly where it was. He had always known where it was. She waited until they were inside, and the door was bolted before she said anything. The safe house was industrial and deliberate. Concrete floors, bare bulbs, a table that had seen worse nights than this one. It smelled like cold metal and cigarettes nobody had smoked recently. Jean moved through it like he knew every corner, which told her everything she needed to know about how long he had been planning for exactly this. She set her hands flat on the table. "Steady. Barely. Tell me who you are." He stood with his back to her for a moment, looking at nothing on the far wall. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, forearms on the table. And for the first time since she'd dragged him in from the rain, he looked like a man deciding how much of himself to hand over. He was quiet for a long time. Then he told her. Not everything. She understood that even as he spoke, that what she was receiving was a measured portion, enough to be true without being complete. His full name was Kong Jin-ho. In Seoul they had a different name for him. Yong-wang, the Dragon King. He said it without pride, without apology, in the same tone someone might give a medical diagnosis. Factual. Already grieved. He had built the largest criminal syndicate on the Korean peninsula from nothing, starting at 16, after a rival faction dismantled his family in a single night. He said dismantled and didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask him to. The tattoo on his neck, the serpent she had spent 2 weeks pretending not to look at, was not decoration. It was a death mark, a promise inked into his skin by the 7 families who had decided he would not live to see 40. He was 37. He had not come to Chicago to hide. He had come to finish something. But the rival faction had moved faster than he'd anticipated. They had crossed onto American soil, and the attack on the cafe was not random. It was a message. They had found him through her. Through the cafe. Through the mornings and the corner table and the $40 he kept leaving under an empty cup. Through her. Her hands started shaking. She looked down at them like they belonged to someone else. She picked up her phone. There was a news alert from 3 days ago she'd swiped away, without reading. The headline too far outside her world to register. She opened it now. Interpol names Kong Jin-ho most wanted in Southeast Asia. His face, taken from a distance, slightly blurred, but unmistakably him. Unmistakably the man who had fixed her door latch and held an umbrella over her in the rain and learned how she took her coffee. Her bandages were still on his wound in the photograph. She set the phone face down on the table and looked at him. He looked back. No apology at his eyes. No performance of remorse. Just the same steady, unflinching dark that had watched her from the alley floor on the worst night of his life. She didn't know what she was going to say. His phone buzzed against the table before she could find out. He read the screen. Something happened to his face, not fear, Nothing that human. A closing. Like a vault door swinging shut behind his eyes. Slow and final and absolute. He looked up at her. They have your mother's address. She never got to ask. By the time the words formed in her mouth, Jean was already on his phone, speaking in rapid Korean to someone who answered on the first ring. Within 20 minutes, a woman Nia had never seen was sitting in her mother's living room on the south side, calm as Sunday, with credentials Nia didn't examine too closely and instructions her mother, bless her, actually followed. She wanted to be angry about that. She was angry about that. But her mother was safe and moving before midnight, and Nia had done nothing but watch it happen, which was its own particular kind of humbling. Jin's team was small and completely silent. No wasted movement, no raised voices, no chaos she could push back against. Just precision, the quiet, practiced kind that told her this was not the first time and would not be the last. She watched them work and felt the ground shift permanently beneath something she believed about the world. They crossed into Michigan before dawn, the sky the color of old dishwater, the highway empty in both directions. Jean drove. She watched the state line disappear behind them and said nothing for a long time. He spoke first. Eyes on the road, voice low. He told her he had watched the cafe for 2 days before the night he was shot. Not as a target, not as a strategy. He said it plainly, the way he said everything. You were the only honest thing I'd seen in 15 years. She looked at his profile in the gray light, the serpent on his neck, the set of his jaw. She didn't know what to do with that kind of sentence, so she let it sit between them and watched the rain start again. At a rest stop outside Detroit, he cut the engine and turned to her. No performance in it, no pressure in his voice. He asked her to leave the country with him, just until it was over. New name, new city, anything she needed. His eyes were steady and completely serious, and she understood, in the way you understand things you don't want to, that he was offering her everything he had left to give. He didn't tell her there might not be an after. Not for him. She said yes. And the way he looked at her, the relief and the grief arriving at exactly the same moment, tangled together so completely she couldn't tell where one ended, told her everything he hadn't. She lost the argument about staying, which meant she won the one about leaving. Jean had spoken to her in Korean first, low and urgent, then switched to English when her expression didn't move, and she had stood in the cold Michigan dark and told him flatly that she had not come this far to wait in a car. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something to his man that she didn't catch, and the matter was closed. So she watched from the shadows at the edge of the waterfront, collar up, rain needling the back of her neck, as Jean walked out to meet them. There were 7. He went alone. He had documents. She knew that much. Names, accounts, enough buried history to collapse 4 organizations across 2 continents. He had explained it to her without drama. The way you explain a chess move. It was leverage. It was supposed to be enough. It wasn't. The shooting started before the exchange was finished, and Jean moved through it with a fluency that stopped her breath completely. Not panic. Not desperation. Something she had no clean word for, a cold, terrible grace. The movement of a man who had been built by the worst years of his life into exactly this. She had seen him fix a door latch. She had seen him hold an umbrella in the rain. Both of those men were real. She understood that now, finally and completely, standing in the dark while the water swallowed the sound of the last shot. When it was over, he walked toward her through the silence. He stopped close enough that she could see the rain on his jaw. He raised one hand and cupped her face, careful, like something he was allowing himself only once, and looked directly into her eyes and spoke in Korean. Slow, deliberate, each word placed like it mattered. She asked what it meant. He didn't answer. He pressed his lips to her forehead and held them there for one long moment. Then he dropped his hand and stepped back. Don't look back. He turned and walked into the dark, and the rain closed behind him like a curtain. 3 days passed. His phone rang out to nothing. The safe house sat empty, swept clean. No sign that anyone had ever been there at all. His team gone. Every last one. No arrests on the wire. No bodies recovered. No trail that led anywhere except to silence. She drove to the safe house on the third day and stood at the door for a long time. One thing remained. A single red dragon pressed into wax, sealed to the door at eye level. Its tiny eye catching the gray October light. Watching her. Still watching her. She went back to her life, the only way she knew how, one shift at a time. The cafe reopened on a Tuesday. She wiped the same counters, restocked the same shelves, smiled at the same regulars who asked where she'd been, and accepted family thing without pushing. She submitted the nursing school application on a Wednesday night, sitting at the corner table after close, the cursor no longer blinking with hesitation. She hit send and sat in the quiet for a while and didn't let herself think about who used to sit in that chair. She didn't read the news for a month. She wasn't ready for what it might say. Then one night she read all of it. The Dragon King Syndicate dissolved completely, its infrastructure dismantled across 3 countries in under 2 weeks. Rival factions arrested in Seoul, Tokyo, Vancouver, and Marseille. Interpol credited an anonymous tip so precise, so thoroughly documented, that investigators described it privately as a confession written by someone who intended to disappear. She read every article. She read them slowly. Near the bottom of the last one, in a short paragraph that the journalist had clearly considered too thin to lead with, Kang Jin-ho, presumed dead. No remains recovered. She set her phone face down on the counter. She didn't cry. She made coffee instead, 1 cup, stood at the window, and drank it watching the empty street below. Then she wiped the counter. Then she went to bed. She went on, which is the hardest thing a person can do, and the thing most people never get credit for. 6 weeks later the package arrived. No return address. Korean postage. Her name on the front in handwriting she recognized immediately. She had seen it in the margins of a Dostoevsky paperback left forgotten on the corner table 3 months ago. Small precise annotations in a language she still couldn't read. Inside, a photograph. She didn't know anyone had a camera that night, but someone had been outside in the rain, shooting through the glass, and they had caught it. Her bent over his wound, both of them lit amber by the cafe lights, his face turned just slightly toward her, not looking at her. Almost. The way you look at something you're trying not to look at. Beneath the photograph, in a fold of black velvet, a ring. Dark metal, simple, no inscription she could find. No note. Nothing. Just the photograph, and the ring, and the echo of a man who had never once used more words than necessary. She held it for a long time. Then she put it on. She closed up the cafe that night and walked to her car in the rain, the ring catching light from the street lamps overhead. She was almost to the curb when she stopped. She didn't know why. Some pressure in the air, some shift in the quality of the silence behind her. She looked across the street. The corner was empty. Of course it was empty, but the street light above it flickered once, twice, then steadied, burning brighter than she remembered it burning before, cutting clean through the rain in a way that felt almost deliberate. She stood there for a long time, rain on her shoulders, ring on her finger, photograph in her bag beside a nursing school acceptance letter she hadn't told anyone about yet. Then she smiled, just barely, just enough, and walked on. If you made it to the end, this story found you for a reason. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Drop a dragon in the comments if you'd wait for him too. And share this with someone who needs a story tonight.